Thanks for tuning in to Chamber Business News. It's Request to Speak. It's the web's best political talk show about Arizona politics. I'm Garrick Taylor. I'm joined today from Ballard's Bar, Roy Herrera. Roy, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And you know her from Twitter. Courtney Shadegg is here. You've also read her in The Federalist. Courtney, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
All right. Segment 1, the minds, they are a-changin. All right. If you change your mind on a particular topic, are you a cynical flip-flopper? Or are you somebody who changes his or her opinion in the face of new evidence? So Joe Biden is in the race. He's been in public life for decades. He's going to be probably taking positions that he did not have decades ago. So is that a good thing, or is he just sticking his finger in the wind and adjusting to political times? Roy, what do you think?
I think it's a good thing. I think that politicians get criticized more than they probably deserve for changing their mind on issues. And the reason I think that is because times change, right? I mean, ultimately, I want a politician to make what I think the best decision is in that particular time period. And so if circumstances have changed, if history has changed, if the society has changed, I don't mind if a politician changes their mind. Now, of course, there could be a more cynical scenario where somebody's literally changing their mind because they did a poll and it's going to help them politically, and that happens too. But even then, if it's the right outcome, I'm not going to sit there and criticize them about it.
So, Courtney, when I think of politicians who have switched parties, I think of people like Ronald Reagan was once a Democrat, Phil Gramm was once a Democrat, Liz Warren was once a Republican. Is this okay, or should we expect people in public life to hold hard and fast to their opinions forever and ever? What do you think?
No, I mean, I think it's fine to change over time. I think that is expected, right, over 30 years plus. I think the problem comes when you go on a town hall and you say, oh, felons should be able to vote, right? And then the next day, after the outrage, you're like, oh no, I changed my mind. That's not what I meant. Or you go on The View saying, I don't apologize about how Anita Hill was treated. And then the very next day, you say on ABC This Morning, I'm really sorry I treated her inappropriately.
Yeah.
Those are things where I think if you believe what you believe, you need to stand up and tell people why you believe that.
Yeah. Roy, this is going to be interesting to watch, Biden especially, because things are different than they were back in the 70s. And he's going to be thinking about issues in a whole new way. He will be new to these issues. He's not a Buttigieg type candidate. What do you think this candidacy means for Biden? What Biden do you think will be seen in the year 2019 and 2020? The
party has changed. On the Democratic side, I think it has become more progressive. I think on certain issues that he has had prior positions on, he's going to have to change his position on it if he wants to win the primary. I think that's just the reality, and so I think he's going to make those adjustments. Certainly because of his history with Anita Hill and some of the sort of Me Too stuff that's come up with him, given that that's such a sensitive issue, particularly in a Democratic primary, he's going to have to account for that, and I think he started in apologizing for some of it. He's running for president. He hasn't been successful in the past running for president, and a lot of it is because he's usually doing these gaffes. Right. So we'll see if it's if he's more sharp and he knows exactly what he needs to say to win a Democratic primary.
Courtney, I'm curious as to where the issue of healthcare is going, specifically Medicare for all. So, do you think Democratic voters will require purity throughout the entire primary season, or do you think even in a primary season, do you think voters will allow their candidates to shift positions?
I think that energy in primaries is usually on the kind of extremes, right? And you see that, and you see Biden kind of hedging a little bit, right? And I think that's where it's going to be a little bit difficult for him in the sense that this is Obamacare, right? Is his, right? In a sense.
Well, yeah.
And so now you have to make the argument, well, it's not perfect, right? And we need to make this change. And I think he's going to have a problem because a lot of voters, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, want to break the system. He's going to have to say, hey, I've been in, government for 30 years, but I'm going to make it better. I'm going to make it different than when I was in 30 years. And he's got to contrast that with Trump. And I'm not sure he'll be able to do it.
Segment 2, what are words for when no one listens anymore? Google it, people. All right, so let's think about some of these labels that get applied to people. Conservative, progressive, Republican, Democrat. do they mean anything anymore? When you think of a conservative, do you think of Donald Trump? When you think of a socialist, do you think of Bernie Sanders? Or do you think of like Maduro or the USSR or something like that? Should we try to reorient the definitions of these words, or is all lost and forget it? People can call themselves whatever they want. What do you think, Roy?
Well, I mean, I think the meanings of the words have changed over time. I mean, I think if you would have asked me in college, describe what being a conservative means, I would have said, limited government and deregulation and perhaps a hawkish foreign policy. If you would have asked me what a liberal meant, I would have said, it supports the social safety net and regulation and maybe more sort of a peacenik kind of thing.
All right, so what do they mean today?
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, they don't quite mean the same thing anymore. If you are associating conservatism with republicanism or, being progressive with being a Democrat. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I mean, Trump is, in my view, not particularly conservative. You may disagree with me on that, but, he is the Republican president. I think most self-identified conservatives would approve of him. And so it's like, to me, I look at Trump, who's, advocating for tariffs and, other things that I traditionally wouldn't say was very conservative. So it does have less meaning, but it still has value, and we can get into why it has value, but it definitely has changed.
Let's go back to a young Courtney Shadegg. It's 1994. We have a Republican Party that's for free trade, things like labor mobility, fiscal conservatism, concern about the growing entitlement state, things like that. Not so much anymore. What do these labels mean?
I think labels are important, and that's how, right, voters tend to judge people, especially if it's just one word. And as a voter, you can say, I'm a conservative, and then have these issues that you kind of diverge on. And that's perfectly acceptable, right? And that's why it's important to say, okay, is Trump a conservative or is he a Republican, right? So I would argue he's more of a Republican, right, than a conservative in more the traditional way, right? He has these disagreements on trade, and he's definitely not fiscally conservative. So it's important to continue the labels, but it's also important to kind of define within that, right? Say, well, they aren't these things, and that's okay. It's okay to be one-offs from whatever that is.
Roy, what do you think? I once would agree with Courtney that these labels were helpful shorthand for voters. Now I don't know whether to make heads or tails of any of these things. Is it worth us trying to take ownership once again over these labels, give them some meaning?
Well, that might be an impossible task, unfortunately. And I think they do have meaning. I mean, to your point, we live in very partisan times, and you can argue maybe it was always that way, but I think they are very partisan. And I think when people make the decision of it's very tribal, right? So when they make the decision of what group they're in, I think that the reason they make those decisions are increasingly not ideological. I think the other factors, whether it be their race or education level, whether they live in an urban community or rural community, whether they're married or not, I mean, those kinds of things I think are more determinate of what tribe that you're in. And a lot of those result in some sort of emotional ties to a particular, ideological name.
But also, I think there are a lot of voters in the middle who don't pay attention. We all pay attention, right, to issues every day. What are these people saying every single day, right? But there are people who go to the polls who don't at all pay attention to these things. They go in and it's how they feel on that day, right? And what was the last news cycle they saw, or how do they feel about their paycheck this month? And that's how they're going to vote. And I think, so for just that kind of snapshot, it might be that kind of word that matters to them.
Segment 3, read, watch, listen. This is why people tune in. Give us a recommendation, Roy. What have you been reading, watching, listening to that you think others ought to tune into?
Well, I mean, I suppose this is the segment for Game of Thrones, but we won't talk. Everyone talks about Game of Thrones. We're not going to talk about Game of Thrones. I just got done reading a book, and again, this is a heavy topic, but on criminal justice reform called Charged.
Bazelon.
Yeah.
And
it was really quite good, because what she gets at, I think, in the book is the important role that prosecutors play, obviously in our criminal justice system, but more importantly, as people on the left and the right think about criminal justice reform, I think thinking about the discretion that prosecutors have and what do we expect from prosecutors is really an important aspect if we do want to reform our criminal justice system and mass incarceration, all those things. So the book was really good examination of those issues and kind of tells the story of how prosecutors approach their jobs.
Well, all right, Courtney, you're up. What's the recommendation?
I am currently reading Tucker Carlson's Ship of Fools. And you might not agree. I don't agree
Oh
with
my
everything.
gosh.
I know. I knew you were going to have that reaction.
I hear users clicking
Okay,
off.
hold
all over
on,
the button.
hold
All
on.
right.
You might. I don't agree with with a lot of things Tucker says, but I think it's a really good book if you're trying to understand. There's a whole group of people that both parties are not paying attention to, don't want any part of, and while I disagree with Tucker's recommendations for how to deal with that issue, I think it's important because he kind of gives a voice to what their issues are.
Yeah.
So.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, Roy. Tune in next time to Request to Speak. We'll see you next time.